Thanks very much, both of you, for coming along today.
It's a pleasure.
I think maybe we'll start with introductions. So, Chris, perhaps you would introduce who you are.
Yep, I'm Chris White. I'm the infrastructure planning lead for the energy sector. I was formerly a case manager on projects such as Thames Tunnel, Tideway, Hinkley Point Sea Connection, Richborough and Hinkley Point Power Station.
Brilliant. And Kelvin?
I'm Kelvin MacDonald. I'm an examining inspector. I work on contract. I'm not on the staff. I was an IPC commissioner originally, which shows how old I am. And I've done 4 cases, all in the energy sector: power stations, gas pipelines, electricity connectors, and an offshore wind farm.
And I'm Frances Fernandez. And like Kelvin, I started off life as a infrastructure planning commissioner, and then have become a full-time employee of the planning inspectorate the last couple of years. And I've worked on various cases in the energy and transport sector. So that's a little bit about us. So let's start today by looking at acceptance and what's involved in acceptance, drawing on our knowledge of the cases that we've been doing so far. So Chris, I think you really probably start the whole process off. So how does acceptance come about? How do you receive an application?
So we've received the we've been doing the pre-application discussions with the applicant for potentially up to 2 years beforehand. We'll then receive or get notice of the application usually about a month beforehand in terms of them given a specific date. We'll know quite a few months in advance when it's likely to come in. Actually on the day they will submit it to us, usually in hard copy. There'll be 2 hard copies submitted to us.
Right.
And
why do they submit it in hard copy?
The Secretary of State, the regulations say that they should still be submitting hard copies, although we've moved hopefully completely to electronic working. We will still have 2 hard copies.
Right.
One usually stays in the office, one usually goes to the acceptance inspector or inspectors during the application. So once it's come in electronically, it'll be on USB sticks. That will then get uploaded to Horizon, so all the information is available for the inspectors straight away on Horizon. We will then usually send USB sticks out for the inspectors as well.
Okay. And Kelvin, what happens then? You receive it through your inbox?
Yes.
How do you start getting into acceptance? What's your first job?
Hopefully you will have been warned that you're going to do a particular case, and you'll be kept in touch by the case manager as to when it's coming in, so you're ready for it. And if you're wise, you would have done some of the background reading, certainly some of the material that's published already, so that you're more up to speed. Do
you mean on the applicant's website? Is that where you'd get the information from? Or?
I would look on the applicant's website, but I'd mainly look on the National Infrastructure website, taking into account that you're not really meant to make any recommendation on anything that hasn't been submitted to the inquiry. So there may be things on the applicant's website that won't eventually come into the evidence. But just to get the context of it. Yeah. And then it comes in, you get told about it. Sometimes a courier arrives with about 5 big boxes of stuff, so you clear your shelves. First thing I try to do, and I've done about 3 or 4 acceptances, is to come into Bristol and meet the case manager, meet the case team, meet the environmental services team and the legal person.
Right.
Very soon after it's come in.
And what's the importance of that, do you think?
It may be the first time you've met the whole team as an acceptance inspector, so it's getting to know the team. And I think one of the things that we're stressing here is not just the value but the huge importance that you're working as a team. The acceptance inspector and the examining inspector is just one part of a team. But also you need set deadlines, you need to be sure that all the areas that you're required to look at are being covered by someone in the team. You need to coordinate. You need to establish who's going to do what by when.
Okay.
So the case team will have been working on the project for quite a long time during the pre-application process. So they'll have knowledge of the case, they'll have knowledge of particular issues or sort of the setup of the documentation as it comes in. So it should be a quick sort of conversation to get up to speed quite quickly in terms of sort of pointing you in the right direction to where the key documents are, where you might start sort of looking at various issues during the application process.
And there's 28 days, as I understand it, for acceptance.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how do those 28 days pan out? Roughly what would happen over that period of time?
As a case team, the case manager would usually have planned out the sort of process, looking at when people are available. The case team is obviously working on more than one case at any one time. So they'll have looked at availability for the legal team, the EST team, in terms of when they can input or review the documents as you go along.
And EST are who?
Environmental Services team.
Okay. So what would they be looking at, just for example?
They'll be looking at the adequacy of the environmental statement, any other particular issues, and they're involved on the checklist. One of the key documents to get to grips with quite early on is the acceptance checklist, the Section 55 checklist, which we will be producing to help with the final decision of whether to accept the application or not.
Right.
So you can, as an inspector, you can look at that quite early on to see the key issues that the case team and the inspector will need to look at in terms of making sure that the standard of the application is acceptable, and also whether the applicant's carried out all their pre-consultation requirements as you go along.
It sounds a bit like a rubber stamping exercise.
No, not particularly. You would hope that there's quite a lot of work put in during the pre-application stage to make sure that the application's as good as it can be when it comes into us, and that's the whole front-loading process that we've hopefully tried to do with the applicant. That's why we have regular meetings with the applicants. We also review the draft documents during the pre-application stage so they can submit documents to us to get our opinion on certain issues that they might have concerns about. So hopefully when the applications actually comes into us during that stage, it's hopefully the quality to actually go through the process and get accepted.
It still sounds a bit like rubber stamping, if I can be so bold.
It's not. So, some bits are rubber stamping. There's bits on the acceptance list talking about is there a north point on the map. So you can look at that and you can tick it off and scale of the maps and things like that. But there is really quite a lot of judgment involved in this. One of the tests, Section 55 tests, is that the application is of a standard that the Secretary of State would find satisfactory. Satisfactory is not defined anywhere. So it's up to the team and the acceptance inspector to say, if this goes into examination, have we got the basis here that we can examine? And is it there? There's other tests, the adequacy of consultation that the applicant has carried out. On one of the acceptances I did, there were some complaints from a local authority that the consultation wasn't good enough. But all the other people who had made representations, all the other surrounding local authorities said it was perfect. So again, it's a matter of judgment.
Right.
Is this fact? Is this something else going on here? So there is a lot of judgment there.
And that's one of the key things that happens during the application or the acceptance period, is that we go out to the local authorities to get their opinion as to whether the adequacy of consultation, or whether they think the adequacy of consultation is at an acceptable level. So we will receive, we usually give them 14 days, we would then receive their comments on the consultation process that has happened during the pre-app stage. They will write into us with their comments to say whether they think it's appropriate or not, and then we have to take that into consideration when making the decision.
Right.
One of the other key tests is about the that the applicant has to show that they've done the consultation in accordance with the guidance set out. So that's another key document that perhaps the inspectors can look at a fairly early stage. Is
Guidance.
the CLG guidance on the pre-application stage.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
And part of the documentation they have to produce is to show how they've taken into account, I think the phrase is, the consultation responses they've had, which doesn't mean to say that they have to have changed the nature of the scheme because of it, but they've taken into account. So then again, it's a matter of judgment. It's not ticking boxes at all.
And I imagine that that document could be quite lengthy if there's over 1,000 people that have commented, and if the applicant has to demonstrate that they've taken into account. I'm assuming, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that that's going to be a pretty big amount of information in a document.
Yeah, the consultation report is usually one of the biggest, apart from the environmental statement aspect. It's the next biggest report with a lot of appendices. What we sometimes ask, and the applicants do quite often nowadays, is their own checklist. So they will complete the Section 55 checklist.
Okay.
And that's used as a tool by, I suppose, both the inspectors and the case team as a guide to try and see where that kind of the information is within the documentation. So, for example, sort of, have they carried out have they publicised the application at the Section 46 stage or whatever? There'll be a link somewhere to say the newspaper notices are in Appendix 4.6 or something like that. And that's quite an easy guide then to go and check where that information is, I think.
So what I'm hearing then is a real blend. If I think about the team, there's a blend of EST who are looking at the environmental side and the environmental information quite carefully. The case team who perhaps are looking at some of the nuts and bolts, or are the plans and the scales correct, sort of broadly. And then the acceptance inspector who would be applying a judgment around, is it of a suitable standard? So it sounds to me that those skills all blend in together, so that you can then come to the point where you can reach a view whether this application is suitable for acceptance or not.
Yes, definitely.
And so that, I guess there's been many acceptances that have gone through now. We've done something like 70 projects, I guess. Are there any obvious areas where applicants fall down?
I think one of the ones that we've been advising applicants on recently is to make sure that they clearly evidence how they've taken consultation responses into account during the process. I think Kelvin mentioned it earlier, but it was it's quite key. It's a key message that we try and get across to them now, and that's probably something to look out for.
Right.
In that sometimes it's not quite clear where that link has happened and where they might have gone out to consultation, but what have they actually done with that consultation responses, and how that might have shaped the application up to the point of submitting it for examination. So that's a key issue to look out for, I think.
Okay, and any tips, Kelvin, from yourself?
Well, first, just on that, we do have the right to ask the applicant on that issue, how they've taken into account consultation, for all the original consultation material and responses. And I've had to do that on one case.
Right.
And maybe we'll talk a bit about in a minute how much you've got to read, but that meant, I don't know, 4,000 letters coming in. So you have some checks built in to that. But also, in my experience, falling down on fairly basic things, particularly applicants who don't know the system well. Guidance on how you lay out the document that gives all the details of land that may be subject to compulsory acquisition.
Right.
Falling down on the basic layout and the basic information given. Which wouldn't necessarily be a reason for not accepting it.
Right.
If you think and the team thinks in their judgment that this can be rectified and still can be examined. But it's sometimes the little things I've found.
Right, brilliant.
I suppose just to sort of wrap up in terms of what happens at the end, if a decision is made to accept it for examination, we can also issue Section 51 advice alongside the final acceptance decision, which might rectify some of those problems.
Yes.
So, like you say, we might say, can you update the land plans or something like that to make sure that the correct information is contained within them. So there's that pre-exam period that we can use before the actual examination starts to try and make some of those changes. Yeah.
So we get to the end of our 28 days, and what happens?
Yes.
Is it on the 28th day or 27th day? Something must happen to conclude that process. So how do we wrap this conversation up, and what happens at the 28th or 27th day?
Well, we try and do it usually within about 3 weeks if we can, if everyone's working as they should be. And then the final decision is delegated to the head of service. So Simone will make the decision with the examining authority. So she will review all the work that's been done and the checklist, and then it's finally signed off whether to accept it or not. If it's likely not to be accepted, then it has to be, Secretary of State has to be informed.
Right.
So it goes through that process.
And if we do accept it, how does the applicant find out?
They will receive the letter from us saying that it's been accepted to go forward to examination, along with the checklist, and that will be published on our website.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you both very much.